Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 4 of um, this course. We are covering structural family therapy this week. I apologize for my voice. I record lectures a week in advance so that you guys will for sure have them by the beginning of the week, the following week. And I am still getting over coronavirus this week. So if I'm disjointed or my voice is just rough to listen to, I apologize. Hopefully, we'll get through it all right. A few things to note as we begin this week. First, in digital dialogue, usually there's like you've been reading Everything I Never Told You, and then a number of other articles as well as chapters. This week, there's much less reading. It's just the one chapter and Mnuchin's obituary. So, as you are sharing in digital dialogue about things you learned this week or things you thought about, feel free to include videos. There's a number of videos that you'll watch. A lot of different, it's kind of a compilation of videos of Mnuchin talking about his theories and about therapy. And then, of course, there are the lectures. This week, Noelle and Brooklyn are going to be doing a guest lecture. Their presentation is this week, and they will be talking to us about structural family therapy also. So you can include anything that you're thinking about as you watch their lecture or this lecture. Of course, the reflection questions are a separate thing. Another thing I wanted to mention briefly is that we are still looking to create notes as a class. One of our class members would really appreciate being able to have some help with notes. She does a good bit of note taking on her own, and she's very conscientious about that. But she just wants to make sure she is covering everything. And so if you are up for participating in that with Google Docs, so I've created a Google document and I'll put that on Learning Suite so everybody can access it. But you can just put pictures in it. Like if you are taking notes by hand, because that's a better way for you, feel free to just take images of your notes, maybe with your phone or whatever, and stick those in the Google document. Um, and then, of course, there are also the slides. I'll upload the slides from my PowerPoint presentations. So you can use those as well, kind of as a base. You could put a slide in and then do notes next to it. That works. Anyway, I think that's everything. So I'm going to now share our PowerPoint for the week. So, structural family therapy. And of course, as you have read, the kind of originator of structural family therapy is Salvador Minuchin. And here's one of the things he said. In all cultures, the family imprints its members with selfhood. The human experience of identity has two elements: a sense of belonging and a sense of being separate. The laboratory in which these ingredients are mixed and dispensed is the family, the matrix of identity. So, previously, when we were talking last week, we talked about Bowen and his ideas of differentiation and lack of differentiation, and kind of self, and how we can have pseudo selves, and that idea of connection versus individuality. And so that theme, that kind of, I think about doing two sides of the coin. I talk to my clients about two sides of the coin, but that theme is another one that runs through many different models. And Mnuchin has different ideas about it than Bowen does. So Salvador Mnuchin, he said, I describe family values as responsibilities towards others, increase of tolerance, compromise, support, flexibility, and essentially the things I call the silent song of life, the continuous process of mutual accommodation without which life is impossible. That's kind of in relation to other people. And as you hopefully read or watched, or maybe you haven't done the reading or watched yet, and this is one of your first things, but Mnuchin grew up in South America and in a very close knit community. And so his experiences, we talk about his lens, those experiences in his community really shaped how he saw families and family therapy. Also, his experience as kind of an outsider. We've talked about how there's some, like, in society, there are kind of similar processes that happen in that larger sphere or larger system as there are in a smaller system. And he knew what it was like to feel on the outside. And so when he came to the States, as he studied, he was interested particularly in families that were kind of on the fringes of society. And as he developed this model, recognizing that just like Bowen's model came from his training in the medical field and as a psychiatrist and looking at schizophrenic patients, um, Mnuchin's training and what he was looking at involved families that were more on the fringe, families that were lower socioeconomic status, that were really struggling, maybe had teenagers that were really struggling with a lot of different issues, drug use, violence. He also looked at families with anorexic children. So that shaped his lens. Um, so Mnuchin Center for the Family, he was the head of that for many years. When he died, it actually changed its name. So that's just been in the last few years. He just passed away, I think, in 2017. Anyway, these are from that website. So just, and these sort of were covered, but maybe in not so many words in the chapter you read. Structural family therapy is a strength based, outcome oriented treatment modality based on ecosystemic, you guys know that, like Bronfenbrenner's ecosystemic principles. Um, one of the keys is that context. You guys have learned about context. Context organizes us. Our behaviors are a function of our relations with other people. So the contexts, the systems that we are part really do influence and shape us. And Mnuchin felt that poignantly. The structural therapist focuses on what is taking place among people rather than individual psyches. So I talked, I think, in the lab not last week, but the week before, about kind of the system that different kinds of therapists look at. Psychologists look more within the individual psyche. Um, but Mnuchin looked at families and he looked at society and how society impacted families. He said family is the primary context, the matrix of identity, where we develop ourselves as we interact with spouses, parents, children, and other family members. The family is in constant transformation, adapting to an ever changing social environment. So there's lots of reasons that the family is in constant transformation. There is that social environment, also kind of that chronosystem, so how things progress through time. Families also progress through time. Kids get older. We talk about roles and rules and subsystems and boundaries and hierarchies in structural family therapy. And of course, that changes. Like I've mentioned before, you treat a 2-year-old differently than you treat a 22-year-old, and differently than you treat a 12-year-old. So that kind of constant evolution that families make means that they need to be adaptive, and we'll talk more about that. The family's structure consists of recurrent patterns of interaction that members develop over time as they accommodate to each other. So again, these are our foundational systemic principles. A well functioning family is not defined by the absence of stress or conflict, or as Bowen would have said, anxiety, but by how effectively it handles that stress or conflict or anxiety as it responds to the developing needs of its members and the changing conditions in its environment. The job of a structural family therapist is to locate and mobilize underutilized strengths, helping the family outgrow constraining patterns of interaction that impede the actualization of its own resources. So, Minuchin wanted to help people see that they had strengths and possibilities that maybe their previous roles that they'd gotten kind of stuck in, hadn't allowed them to use. And yeah, he talked about that. So let's see here. Structural family therapists, I'm reading at the top, would say that an individual's identity is formed by being a member of numerous subsystems. Within such various roles as spouse, parent, employee, lover, and child to one's own parents, we develop different aspects of personality and develop a sense of self. So, thinking about that for a minute, well, the first reflection question is going to be about that and how it differs from Bowen. Okay, so in looking at family structure, you could think of this like family structure as kind of like an org chart in a big corporation. So, like, who is in which departments and who is in charge of who and who's working together on what project, and is there maybe some like kind of cross departmental collaboration, all of these things. That would be an example of maybe that larger system and how the larger system also parallels what's happening in the smaller family system. So, in the family system, we have power and hierarchy. That's one of the structural principles that a therapist is going to be looking at. And power and hierarchy are about like who is making decisions and um, what kinds of rules are there in place to say who is in a position of power. So, for example, if there's one person who's making the money, is that the person who gets to decide how the money is spent? What if the person who's making the money is a child? Um, do they get to decide how the money that they make is spent? Or is it needed by the family? And even though the child is making the money, the parents decide how that money gets spent. Um, so decision making power, this can also be called like a leadership or executive subsystem. So then into subsystems. Subsystems are groupings of family members that accomplish specific tasks. So it might be like a department in an organization or in a university, I guess. Um, so there and one person can be part of a number of different subsystems. For example, there may be an executive subsystem, which is maybe mom and dad, or maybe executive subsystem could include if there's multiple generations or like three generations living at home, maybe that includes a grandma or grandpa. Executive subsystem, if there is maybe a single parent home and there's an older child, maybe that older child gets pulled into the executive subsystem a lot while mom or dad, whoever is the single parent, is out working. So there's that kind of executive or parental subsystem. A parent, as well as being part of the executive subsystem, might also be part of the couple or marital subsystem, and that can be different because those are different functions. So there's the leadership of the family and kind of making sure things happen, making sure things get done, but the parental subsystem or rather the couple subsystem, that is a different function where the point is to have a strong relationship and to be able to depend on your spouse, to have collaboration with your spouse, to feel close. A number of you mentioned, I love that so many of you thought of this last week in digital dialogue, that God may be kind of triangulated into that couple subsystem. And that could be a healthy thing to do. God can handle whatever you throw at him pretty much. So, unlike pulling a child up into that parental role, which would maybe be less healthy, God could handle it. God also may be part of the executive subsystem of the family if they're religious, and it's important to them to make decisions based on prayer. So mom and dad might work together and then pray about, are we going to make this move? Are we going to accept this job? Are we going to have another child? Whatever it is. There can also be sibling subsystems. So those relationships with each other. Hopefully, you saw or will see the video. There's like it's a role play, basically showing structural family therapy, and it has the sibling subsystem, a brother and a sister, and they have a relationship with each other, but that relationship kind of keeps getting hijacked by dad, who, whenever they're in conflict, reaches in and sides with the daughter and kind of upsets that sibling subsystem. So, in that case, the boundaries around that subsystem would be pretty diffuse. They would be not very strong. So, boundaries, then, of course, are the rules about who is included and excluded from a specific subsystem. So, if the rules are really loosey goosey or subject to change at any time or something like that, then of course you would have that kind of those diffuse boundaries that could lead to enmeshment and even fusion, um, where maybe there's less differentiation. And so, because maybe you have a parent and a child, and they're supposed to be part of these different subsystems, a parental subsystem and a sibling or a child subsystem. But if the boundaries are not very clear, then maybe those two kind of get their relationship is much closer, especially maybe if that there aren't good there's not good connection between parents. Alliances, coalitions, and triangles. So, where a subsystem, so subsystems and alliances, coalitions, triangles kind of sound the same because a subsystem is like they're accomplishing a specific task in the family. Alliances, coalitions, and triangles would be like a work group, or maybe oh, what's it called that they do in a committee, in the government. So maybe you have Republicans and you have Democrats, but they come together to form a committee to handle a specific problem. Um, and sometimes they're handling a problem, sometimes they're just, doing whatever is a normal function. So an alliance would be, and this is probably in your book also, I don't remember which chapter it was in, but an alliance would be a more positive thing, like something that is known to other people, and maybe you have an alliance of two kids because they decided to work together on this project that they are both really interested in, and so they are making I don't know, a blanket fort. So it's like a short-term thing. um, you could also have a coalition. Coalition is often less explicit, more implicit, and can be negative, can have that negative connotation in that a coalition is often some people against another person. So maybe you see that, maybe there's one of the parents is a harsh disciplinarian, and the kids get sick of it and they decide that they're going to have a kids coalition against this parent. And so when one of them gets reprimanded or whatever, maybe another kid comes and chews the parent out or stands between them or comforts them or whatever it is. Um, so that would be a coalition. Triangles, same thing with Bowen, is another form of a coalition. And unlike with Bowen, I mean, there can be some idea of it managing the anxiety. But it can also be like an intergenerational triangle where maybe maybe mom, even though she's part of that parental system, has conflict with dad and feels like he doesn't listen to her, he doesn't listen to her ideas. And whenever she gets into a fight with dad or they disagree about how to parent or something like that, maybe one of the kids um, takes mom's side all the time. And then mom and that child form a strong attachment while dad gets kind of pushed away, and those two are kind of against him. It can be a triangle. Okay, roles and rules. So, um, roles are family members' responsibilities, and then the rules are the expectations about those responsibilities and about what will be kind of the tasks that the family has to accomplish together. So you can have roles like an executive role where you're in charge of the family. You can have roles that are less explicit, um, like the scapegoat or the problem child or whatever. And maybe nobody says that specifically, but if the that kind of the energy or the negative energy of the family gets pushed into one person, and that that thing, it was projection, that family projection process from Bowen, um, in structural family therapy. It's called something different, but roles and rules are also an important part of the family structure that the therapist needs to figure out. So the therapist can figure this out by asking questions like, who's in charge in the family? Who has the most power? Who has the least power? Who speaks up? If you have to decide something, how does it get decided? Who has the last word? Um, you could also have them maybe sculpt the family. And sculpting is it's an experiential exercise that can be used in a lot of different models. But basically, you're saying, show me, instead of just telling me, show me your family relationships. And so they might put some people closer together and some people further apart. And maybe some people are like this and other people are hugging and whatever it is. So the therapist is going to try to get lots of different data points, getting information from different perspectives, and then also we'll be observing what's happening in session, what they can see that is maybe a pattern from of the family. All right, so I told you this reflection question was coming up. Bowen asserted that our pseudo self is defined in terms of others and relationships with others. Minuchin says that we develop our true sense of self in relation to others and the roles we have with others. So, what do you think? Do you think that defining yourself and understanding yourself in relationship to others makes that a pseudo self? Or is that just a way to know yourself? How does that sense of connection and individuality balance in your mind? It's a big question. Okay. Family map. Oops, too fast. So, family mapping. So, with Bowen, of course, we had genograms. And hopefully, you saw more of an explanation of that last week in the lab, as well as in that video that was part of the week's learning. So, in structural family therapy, the maps look a little different. Instead of having each person with a square or a triangle, or a circle, sometimes triangles, sometimes combination of those. Um, People are just usually designated by an initial. It can be an initial for their name, or it can be an initial for their one of their family roles, like mom, M for mom, D for dad. And instead of, because we're not mapping the relationships so much as kind of like the way that anxiety is dealt with in the family. Instead, in structural family therapy, it's like the org chart. So we are mapping the structure. So we're looking at boundaries, we're looking at coalitions, we're looking at detouring, which that's the name that structural family therapy has for what Bowen called the projection process. So kind of detouring a problem onto somebody else. It's maybe it's parents' problem, but it gets shoved onto a child. Over involvement. So just like a 2 lines maybe would be close. 3 lines is like over involvement, which could be like enmeshed. Um, so other things about that, instead of with a genogram, you want at least 3 generations. 4 would be great. However many generations you can do is great, because then you can see how that multi-generational process maps out how the anxiety flows, all of those things. With a structural family therapy map, you're just going to be looking at that immediate family. So there will probably be 2 generations. It shows the hierarchy. It will probably show subsystems, boundaries, alliances, more than relationships. Um, Again, like I said, it's structural instead of interpersonal. Um, the family is a natural group over which time has evolved patterns of interacting. So this is back from systems theory. We've got these patterns of interaction that families get into. These patterns make up the family structure, which governs the functioning of family members, delineating their range of behavior and facilitating their interaction. So, having the family structure gives people a sense of structure, of what to expect, who's going to be in charge, who's going to be doing what. Um, and and of course, that can be a healthy thing. Having structure is good. We talked about this with systems theory also. If it's all chaos, then the family is going to fall apart. On the other hand, it can get rigid and it can get unhealthy. So if one person's role becomes the person who kind of like keeps getting detoured onto, one person maybe is like the bad kid or the problem child or the identified patient, and like Bowen said, that can be mental health issues, it can be physical health issues, it can be social issues. All of those things work together. Humans are just these fascinating, multifaceted people. Um, so those things can all be part of this, and so people can feel kind of constrained in how they act based on the roles that they're given. Okay, I might have to take a break for a minute and go get a drink of water. Okay, another reflection question. So we talked about that rigidity and chaos in systems theory, and how neither rigidity nor chaos is really a healthy state to be. And instead, we want both structure but also flexibility. And that's one of the key points in structural family therapy, that we do have structure and we need to have structure, but we also need that structure to be flexible enough to adapt to different situations. So, what are some ways, or what were some ways in which your family structure were flexible? What were some ways that maybe things changed depending on the situation? And then maybe what were some ways in which it was rigid, rigid with roles or rules, maybe gender roles or rules, ways people got put in roles maybe that they didn't particularly like. Um, One of the systems principles here is, I don't know if we talked about this in systems theory, but the idea of complementarity, meaning sometimes one of the structures that are the roles and rules that kind of get put in place is like an over functioner and an under functioner. So, um, we're trying to maintain homeostasis, the level of functioning that needs to be there. And so maybe there's a situation in which somebody gets sick and somebody else kind of steps up. But then that gets kind of stuck. And instead of it being able to equalize back out, and then maybe this person gets sick and that person steps up, that can become a long-standing pattern where you have one spouse who overfunctions. And maybe that's something they learn not just in their marriage relationship, maybe they learned it as a child, but they start overfunctioning. And kind of in response, the other spouse underfunctions. Or maybe one spouse takes control a lot and wants to say how all the decisions are made, and the other spouse, kind of to avoid problems, starts to be apathetic about decisions, just kind of, okay, whatever, you make all the decisions, I don't care. And so then they can get stuck in that pattern. Okay, so here's some examples of family maps. I hope I'm not stepping on Noelle and Brooklyn's toes too much. Um, you will maybe get to cover the same information multiple times. And I think that's great because repetition is a key to learning. Also, application and experience are keys to learning. And this model is a very experiential model, which we'll talk about more later. So, in family maps, the parental subsystem and the child subsystem, we hope, are that would be pretty normal for them to be at different hierarchical levels. So, as we're looking at that map, the top is like more power, more leadership, more responsibility, more ability to like say how decisions are made, and then lower, of course, is less. So up in kind of in the middle top, you see some different family maps. There's the father in charge, and so this is showing how this structure can change depending on the situation, and that's an okay adaptive thing. So maybe dad is in charge one night of making dinner, and so he's above, and there's that clear boundary. Oh, we didn't talk about the other types of boundaries. So we'll talk about them in a little bit. There's the clear boundary, the diffuse boundary, which means there's a lot of permeability. People can go through the boundary. And then there's the rigid boundary, where there's like, it would be kind of like cut off in Bowen's model, where it's really hard to get through that boundary. So here there's um, a, a clear boundary. Dad's in charge. Maybe mom and child are clearing, wiping, and setting the table, or something like that. That's what happens in my family. Our family dinner jobs change each night, and one person is in charge of making dinner, and somebody else is the leader that night. And usually, the leader is in charge of clearing, wiping, and setting the table, but they're also in charge of assigning all the other jobs. So maybe they assign somebody else to do that. Then maybe there's a different, so in a different situation now, maybe mom is in charge of the lawn care. So there's that clear boundary. Maybe she's going to be out there mowing the lawn, pulling the weeds, trimming, watering, whatever it is. Um, in my marriage, we call this who's the captain. And it can be hard. You guys might not have experienced this yet, but it can be hard maybe for a stay at home mom who is kind of in charge. She is the executive subsystem all day long with the kids. And then dad comes in at the end of the day. And now who's in charge? And that can be hard to kind of step on each other's toes. Or over the weekend, maybe like who's in charge now? This is mom's space because it's the home, and she's in charge most of the time. But now dad is here, and dad feels perfectly capable, and like he should be part of the executive subsystem. So we have established captainships, and for example, right now, and this changes because we adapt as it's had to change during COVID when I was not able to do much. But I'm captain of putting kids to bed at night. So I say, okay, now it's time. We're going to have family scripture study and then prayer. And then I'm going to make sure the kids are brushing their teeth and getting in bed. My husband is in charge of he's the captain of the morning. So he makes sure that people are up. Hopefully, we've got teenagers. So usually they get up by themselves. He might make some breakfast. facilitate whatever needs to be facilitated in the morning. Um, so then you can see also other examples. The oldest son is in charge of the children while mom is away. There's a clear boundary between mom and the oldest son. When she comes back, probably that oldest son goes back into the child subsystem. But while she's away, they need somebody to make that executive subsystem, and so oldest son gets pulled up there. Um, yeah, and then you can see how it shifts. Um, then below that, in the middle, we see an example where there's a stepmom. So mom and dad have divorced. They have a child, though, a son, and mom and dad have to co-parent some because they share custody. But dad has remarried, so there's the stepmom in the picture. And for whatever reason, in that first image, stepmom has is kind of the one in charge. She tells everybody, looks like, what to do, and even though there are not very clear boundaries between the biological mom and dad and the son, there is a clear boundary that none of them are in charge. So then the structural family therapy will try to shift that structure. So the mother and father, I'm not sure why they have mother and father together. I'm assuming they were divorced and stepmom is now married to dad. But mother and father and stepmom are all part of that executive subsystem, even though there's a clear boundary. And the son is now not part of that, and he is on a different hierarchical level. Um, so, like I talked about, flexible structures are valuable so that families can respond to a variety of situations. It's when things get rigid that there start to be problems. So if the pattern is repeated over and over and over again, especially when that pattern, maybe it served a purpose at one point, but if you can't break out of that, then it starts to feel oppressive. Um, Maybe this is a fairly common one. Maybe you have a mom and dad, and maybe the dad kind of takes the role of the enforcer. Maybe they're both part of the executive subsystem. They're both deciding what happens, but dad is like the enforcer and the rule keeper, and he makes sure everything happens. And mom is like, oh, it's not that bad, and kind of um, uh, she's part of making the rules and being in charge also. But she and dad have gotten into this pattern of kind of good cop, bad cop, as it were. Um, or one of the ways Minuchin like to use a lot of metaphors, and we'll talk about that more later. But there's the sheriff, and dad might say, okay, who's the sheriff in the family? Like, who's the person in charge? Who's kind of the law and order guy or girl? And then is the other parent the deputy sheriff? Are they like working together on this, or is the other parent the defense attorney? Are they going to say, oh no, you better not punish them that way, you shouldn't do that? And when they get into that pattern and those roles become more rigid, it's usually less comfortable, um, because dad seldom wants to be the enforcer or the sheriff all the time. And maybe mom doesn't want to have to feel like she has to kind of push back against that all the time. Or maybe one of them is the fun parent and one of them is the serious parent. And that's not very fun either, because all of us are multifaceted. And yeah, sometimes we know it's important to be serious, but sometimes we want to have fun too. So being able to have that adaptability and flexibility is important. Um, Minuchin said, when families come to me for help, I assume they have problems not because there is something inherently wrong with them. So here's that, if you remember from Self of the Therapist and Systems Theory, the idea of unconditional positive regard. So Minuchin is saying, I assume that these are good people doing their best and they have good strengths. So I assume they have problems not because there is something inherently wrong with them, But because they've gotten stuck with a structure whose time has passed, and stuck with a story that doesn't work. Next week, I think we talk about narrative therapy, so we'll talk more about stories that don't always work. But basically, it's this idea of stuckness, that we have a structure that maybe worked in one situation, but when it gets repeated over and over and over again, people start to feel like it's expected, that it becomes kind of an implicit rule that people act that way, and that's not very healthy. One other family map we see here, Mr. R and Mrs. R. Looks like there's some conflict between mom and dad. Mom is very close to the middle child. There is a clear boundary between executive and child subsystem, but it looks like because of that close relationship, kind of that affiliation between Mrs. R and Patricia, she is kind of pulled away from the rest of the sibling subsystem, so that even though there's that boundary is kind of diffuse, there is kind of a boundary between um, the siblings. Okay, let's see here. Oh, is that what were we there already? Okay, sorry guys. So therapeutic interventions. We have, okay, I don't know what just happened. Hopefully I paused recording for a second. Um, Okay, so therapeutic interventions. Like I said, structural family therapy is, we call it experiential, meaning that part of the change process comes from having new experiences. Just like Sal Minuchin saw families as getting stuck, part of the ways he gets them unstuck is to have them experience something different. So, first part, of course, is going to be joining. That's the same for pretty much every model, because that relationship between the family and the therapist is really important. And that joining can involve um, a number of different kinds of alliance, goal alliances, task alliances, and then general alliance. So, goal alliances, it was where the therapist and the family are basically on the same page about where they're trying to go. So if the therapist thinks, I need to detriangulate and deparentify this child and help the parents have a stronger relationship and become a more effective executive subsystem, whereas the parents think, um, this is working great, or maybe dad is like, you know what, I haven't said this to wife, but I'm actually on my way out. And so they have, there's these very different views of what needs to happen. Therapy is not going to go very well. So that goal alliance is important. And then task alliance is about, like, how are we getting to that goal? And is the family comfortable with how we're going to get to the goal? And if they're not comfortable, can we at least explain why we're doing what we're doing so that we can then build that comfort? So another part of joining that Minuchin talked about a fair amount is mimesis, or accommodation, which is where the therapist kind of joins the system in, sitting how they sit, adopting the vocabulary of the family system. And that can also be kind of tracking, is another kind of piece of that. So maybe the parent refers to a child in some particular way. The therapist may refer to that child in that particular way. Also, as they get on to trying to create change and restructuring, they might start referring to a child in a different way, or ask questions about how the child feels about it, why the parent calls them that, or whatever it is. Um, okay, so family mapping, which we just went over, that helps once the therapist has, like, seen all these different angles of the family and has observed the family and gets a sense of the family. then they'll create this map, kind of that org chart, and talk to the family about it and talk about what they see and help the family understand the diagnosis. Diagnosis meaning, is this structure that I think I'm seeing as a therapist what you're seeing? And can I show you ways in which that structure might be more healthy, might be more adaptive and flexible to deal with other situations that we've got going on now? So, tracking is paying attention to what's going on in the family, is maybe joining some of that. It could also be, and this kind of goes with unbalancing, but it could also be, the therapist doesn't always join or doesn't always act exactly the same way to follow that family pattern. They might unbalance things by rearranging how people are sitting, or maybe if it's like a coalition of three people kind of against one person, maybe the therapist will go sit by that one person to kind of rebalance things. But tracking is paying attention to what's going on in the family and being able to use that language and be immediate about it. Like maybe, hey, we talked about this one structural thing or these roles that you have, and I think I'm seeing that play out right now. That's being immediate. Um, I just noticed that dad, you said this, and mom, you said something, and then child, you got right in the middle of it and said, told dad to back off. I think that's like I'm seeing that coalition that mom and child have. Reframing. Reframing is another really valuable intervention that gets used for a lot of different models. Reframing is basically, let's see it a different way. So maybe reframing is to reframe it into a systemic lens. So, for example, maybe there's an identified patient, kind of the scapegoat, or somebody who, like, all the attention gets put on, and everybody in the family sees it as all them. But reframing would be something like saying, gee, you sure are nice to take on all of the family's problems all on your own. Why do you do that? And so you're pointing out that it's not just them, that in fact, the family problems are bigger than them. Another thing you could do for reframing is, maybe a behavior is seen as negative, and you might reframe it in a positive light. So, for example, maybe there's a child who is sick a lot of the time, and you might say, hey, it sure is nice of you to get sick so that your parents can focus on you instead of on fighting all the time. So then that's kind of like expanding what people are seeing, but also changing the frame. So instead of, oh, this is so frustrating, this child is, maybe they think they're malingering or whatever it is, you're saying, maybe instead of this symptom being a problem, maybe it's actually the solution that is being used in this particular structure. And so we need to change things around. Reframing can be also things like, um, instead of um, maybe anger has always been considered a negative in the family. Anybody who expresses anger or feels angry is told they shouldn't express, they shouldn't feel. And so maybe anger gets reframed as a helpful, powerful way to identify that something's wrong. Maybe from our Everything I Never Told You book, maybe if Lydia had gotten mad at her mom for always insisting that she do this one thing, that could have been really powerful in the family. So that's reframing. Metaphor, I mentioned already briefly. Minuchin really liked to kind of clarify what he was seeing by using metaphors. And, you know, one of the metaphors I used recently with a couple that I was seeing, where there was kind of some parental intrusion, and I won't give any information that could be identifying, but the male in the couple was kind of being told, um, you need to decide, you need to basically decide between this person and that person. And both people were kind of pulling. And I said, what is it like to be a pawn in their chess game? And um, because that's really like, that's what I saw and felt as a therapist, was like, this is a terrible situation to have been put in. This does not seem like very much fun. And, the client went home and thought about that and eventually said to both of the other people, I'm not deciding between you. You guys can work it out. I care about both of you. And it's not my thing. And I'm gonna refuse the role that you have put me in and the rule that I have to be the decider or the decision maker. Um, Enactment is also a great one. It's very experiential. It gets used in a number of different models. And an enactment is, well, in structural family therapy, it's like um, kind of having a conversation that you had that went poorly before, but now the therapist is going to be there and may say, oh, stop there, and do a little bit of restructuring. In the role play that we saw, brother and sister were having conversation. Dad stepped into the conversation, kind of like uh, fanned the flames. And the therapist said, you know what, Dad, I'm going to give you permission not to engage here. And so then she had the brother and sister start talking again. But this time, when dad was not there, kind of pushing his frustrations and whatever it was, then they were able to have a different experience. And they talked about how it was different than they talked before. And it felt better. It felt more like communicating. They were able to actually say, instead of, I'm so mad, you're such a jerk, I care about you and I miss you. Um, how powerful would it have been for Lydia to be able to say to Nath, I am terrified that when you leave home, everything will fall on my shoulders and I'm going to miss you a lot. And then they could have talked about it. Okay, restructuring. So, restructuring is that process of, oh, dang it, is that process of giving people new experiences by shifting how things are. So part of restructuring can be boundary marking, and unbalancing. So boundary marking would be, for example, um, giving parents an opportunity to work together to decide on a parenting goal or a parenting tactic. And so maybe when they come into the room, mom is sitting on one side and dad is sitting on the other side of the room. And maybe all the kids are grouped around mom. Boy, that would be an indication for a structural family therapist, or any family therapist would look at that and be like, I'm seeing something right here. Um, and so maybe the therapist says, okay, mom, you go sit by dad. All you kids sit over here. And mom and dad, I just want you to talk for a minute about what you would like to see um, as a tactic for parenting. So the therapist is giving them a very different experience. Mom and dad are now together, and the siblings or the children are now together. So those boundaries are being marked. And it could do that with the siblings, like I said in that other role play. Also, um, and that can be, as I mentioned before, having people stand up and move. It could also be that the therapist themselves moves um, and goes and kind of bolsters maybe what feels like a weaker part of the family structure so that maybe they feel more empowered to address whatever needs to be addressed. And that can be another thing that happens in unbalancing too. So unbalancing is like maybe mom and dad kind of face off a lot, and the kids tend to take mom's side. Maybe the therapist goes and takes dad's side, and because dad has felt much more powerful, and so that's why all the kids gathered with mom, and then that makes mom become powerful. So now we're kind of um, changing that balance a little bit. um, Another thing, maybe the therapist in our Everything I Never Told You book would notice that Hannah has like zero voice in the family. Maybe the therapist would go sit by Hannah and say, what are you noticing? What do you see going on in this family? Um, how come you don't have a voice? Why is that? Can you tell me about why it is? And can you tell me what it's like for you to not have a voice? And then that attention shifts, and that balance where Hannah has just been kind of lightweight, hanging off the end, or in the middle, or ignored, changes, and people are like, "Oh, look, there's another member of our family we just never noticed." Anyway, okay, so those are some basic interventions. Um, I, guys, I was going to do a case study, but I just am exhausted, and and my voice is going. So I don't think I'm going to do a case study, um, but we will talk more about the Lee family, kind of do that as a case study. Of course, Noelle and Brooklyn will have a case study for you also, like a case conceptualization where they're talking about a family and how it could apply. Um, you could see from this picture, maybe get some ideas about what's going on structurally with the family just by how they're sitting, by how they're interacting. Um, anyway, maybe you can think about your own family too, and how your family was structured. Sometimes it's hard to see the family that you are part of, and really be able to get that outside perspective. But maybe you remember a close friend's family, and you can think back to what you saw in that family. So I'm going to wrap it up now, and hope that we covered a lot of what you need to know, anything you had questions about. Of course, we're looking forward to seeing you at the lab on Friday, and we can ask or talk about questions you have with case conceptualization, go over that. I hope that by the end of the Friday lab, nobody feels stressed about the case conceptualization, but that they will all, everybody, if you watch the lab or participate in the lab, especially, that your questions will be answered and you will have a sense of how would a whatever model therapist um, conceptualize the Lee family. So we did that last Friday with Bowen family systems theory, and we'll do it this Friday also with structural family therapy. And if you guys can be thinking about those so that maybe you can bring some ideas to the lab, that would be great. Then yeah, we can go over those things. So thanks. I hope you're having a great week, and see you Friday.